There are moments in life that arrive without fanfare, unassuming on the surface, yet possessing the seismic power to shatter everything you thought you knew. This is not one of those tales that begins with a bang, a dramatic phone call in the dead of night, or a frantic knock on the door. Instead, it started with something as commonplace as a dusty box tucked away in the attic, a relic of a past seemingly long settled. Inside, amongst faded photographs and forgotten trinkets, he found it a letter, not a recent missive, crackling with urgency, but an old, yellowed envelope, the ink blurred with time, bearing a postmark from a city he'd only ever read about in books. His name was Daniel. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary man, a software engineer with a comfortable suburban home, a loving wife named Sarah, and a routine that he had, until this moment, found comforting. His life was a predictable rhythm of work, home, and the occasional weekend getaway. His parents had passed away some years ago, his mother after a long illness and his father in what he'd always believed was a sudden accident. The details surrounding his father's death had always been somewhat vague, a topic his mother had understandably avoided. He had accepted this, grieved, and moved on, building a life on the foundation they had provided. The letter changed everything. It was addressed to his mother, the handwriting unfamiliar, the return address simply a name and that distant city. Curiosity, a gentle nudge at first, quickly escalated into an insistent demand as he carefully unfolded the fragile paper. The words within were not those of a casual acquaintance. They were intimate, filled with a longing and regret that spoke of a deep connection, a shared history. And then, the signature, a name Daniel hadn't heard since childhood, a name he vaguely associated with hushed whispers and his mother's rare moments of melancholy. His father's first name. Confusion warred with a growing unease. His father's first name was common enough, but the context, the tone of the letter, it all pointed to something more, something hidden. He showed the letter to Sarah, her brow furrowing as she read. They spent hours that night poring over every word, every nuance, trying to piece together the puzzle. His mother had never mentioned this letter, never spoken of any contact with his father after he supposedly passed away. The official story, the one Daniel had carried with him for years, began to feel flimsy, like a poorly constructed facade about to crumble. The postmark was from Buenos Aires, a city thousands of miles away, a place that held no significance in Daniel's memory of his father. He remembered the stories his mother had told him, a car accident on a rainy highway, a sudden and tragic end. There had been a funeral, a burial, or so he thought. Now doubt, a corrosive acid, began to eat away at the foundations of his past. Driven by a need for answers, Daniel began to delve into the few mementos he had of his father. Old photographs, mostly formal portraits or snapshots from family vacations. There were no letters, no personal journals, nothing that could shed light on this newly revealed possibility. He even searched online, a futile attempt to find some record, some connection to a man he realized he barely knew. The search yielded nothing concrete, only more questions. Days turned into weeks, and the mystery of the letter consumed him. He found himself distracted at work, his thoughts constantly drifting back to the faded ink and the implications of its message. Sarah was his rock, offering support and understanding, but he could see the concern in her eyes. This quest for the truth was taking a toll. One evening, while sifting through a box of his mother's belongings, he found another clue, a small, worn photograph tucked away in the back of a jewelry box. It showed his mother, much younger, her arm linked with a man he didn't recognize. The man had his back to the camera, but there was a familiarity in his build, a certain way he held his head. On the back of the photograph, in his mother's handwriting, were 2 words and a date: Buenos Aires, 1988. The same city as the postmark on the letter. The same year his father supposedly died. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. This was no coincidence. The letter, the photograph, the conflicting timelines, they painted a picture far more complex, far more unsettling than he could have ever imagined. The man in the photograph, could it be his father? Alive years after his supposed death, living in a distant land? The thought was both unbelievable and undeniably compelling. He had to know. He had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The quiet life he had known was over. A journey across continents was about to begin. A journey driven by a son's desperate need to unravel the secrets of his father's past. Buenos Aires was a sensory explosion. The chaotic energy of the city, the scent of grilling meat mingling with the exhaust fumes, the rapid-fire Spanish that swirled around him. It was a stark contrast to the quiet predictability of Daniel's suburban life. Stepping off the plane, clutching the worn letter and the faded photograph, he felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with a profound sense of disorientation. He was thousands of miles from home, in a city he knew nothing about, searching for a ghost, a father he thought was dead. His first few days were a blur of navigating unfamiliar streets, struggling with the language, and hitting dead ends. The name on the return address of the letter was common, yielding no useful results in phone directories or online searches. The photograph offered a slightly more tangible lead, the date placing his mother in Buenos Aires around the time of his father's alleged death. But finding a man with his back to the camera from over 3 decades ago felt like searching for a single grain of sand on an endless beach. He started by showing the photograph around, hoping for a flicker of recognition in the faces of the locals. He visited the older neighborhoods, the ones that might have retained their character from the late 1980s. He spoke to shopkeepers, cafe owners, anyone who would listen to his halting Spanish and the desperate plea in his eyes. Most offered polite but unhelpful shrugs. Some eyed him with suspicion. Just as despair began to creep in, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In a small, dusty antique shop in the San Telmo district, an elderly woman with knowing eyes peered at the photograph through thick glasses. "Ah, that face," she murmured, tracing a wrinkled finger over the image of Daniel's mother. "That was a long time ago. Buenos Aires was a different place then." Her name was Isabella. She didn't recognize the man in the photograph, but she remembered Daniel's mother. "She was here for a while," Isabella recalled, her voice raspy with age. She seemed troubled, always looking over her shoulder. Isabella remembered her visiting the shop a few times, buying small trinkets, always paying in cash. She also remembered seeing her with a man, though she couldn't recall his face clearly. He was taller than her. Dark hair, I think. It wasn't much, but it was the first confirmation that his mother had indeed been in Buenos Aires at that time. Isabella also mentioned a small hotel in the Montserrat neighborhood where she thought Daniel's mother might have stayed. It was a long shot, but Daniel followed the lead, his hope rekindled. The hotel was still there, its once grand facade now showing signs of age and neglect. The current owner, a young man who had inherited the business from his grandfather, listened patiently to Daniel's story. He delved into the old guest registers, the brittle pages filled with faded ink. After what felt like an eternity, his fingers stopped on a name, Eleanor Vance, Daniel's mother's maiden name, and listed next to it, another name, Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne, the name on the letter. It was his father. They had stayed at this hotel together, registered as husband and wife, around the time his father was supposed to have died. The register offered no further information, no forwarding address, but it was undeniable proof. His father had been alive in Buenos Aires. He had been here with his mother. The story he had been told about a sudden car accident was a lie. The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Why the deception? What had happened here in Buenos Aires that necessitated such an elaborate fabrication? The questions swirled in his mind, more numerous and more urgent than ever. He thanked the hotel owner profusely and stepped out onto the bustling street, the weight of his discovery heavy on his shoulders. He now had a name, a real name to search for, Julian Thorne. He hired a local private investigator, a discreet man named Javier who spoke fluent English. Daniel provided him with the photograph, the letter, and the information from the hotel registry. Javier was cautious but professional, promising to look into it. Days turned into a tense waiting game. Daniel explored the city, trying to distract himself, but his thoughts were consumed by the mystery of his father. He visited the colorful La Boca neighborhood, the elegant Recoleta cemetery, the bustling markets, each experience tinged with the underlying anxiety of his search. Then, one evening, Javier called. He had found something. A death certificate for Julian Thorne in Buenos Aires, dated a few years after Daniel's mother had stayed at the hotel. But there was a discrepancy. The listed cause of death was not a car accident. It was something else, something that made Daniel's blood run cold. Javier asked him to come to his office. The journey to Buenos Aires had yielded answers, but they were darker and more disturbing than Daniel could have ever imagined. The truth about his father was out there, and it seemed to be shrouded in secrets and perhaps even danger. Javier's office was small and cluttered, stacks of files threatening to topple over at any moment. The dim lighting cast long shadows, adding to the sense of foreboding that had been growing in Daniel since Javier's call. The death certificate lay on the desk between them, a stark piece of paper that held the weight of a devastating truth. The name was indeed Julian Thorne, and the date of death was approximately 5 years after his mother's stay in Buenos Aires. But the cause of death was listed as homicide. Homicide. The word echoed in Daniel's mind, shattering the last vestiges of the comforting lie he had been told his entire life. His father hadn't died in a car accident. He had been murdered, here in this distant city years after supposedly leaving his family. The implications were staggering. Why the secrecy? What had his father been involved in that led to such a violent end? And why had his mother perpetuated the lie for so many years? Javier explained that the official records were scant. The case had been closed years ago, unsolved. He had managed to dig up some old newspaper articles, brief mentions of a foreign national named Julian Thorne who had been found dead in a less reputable part of the city. The articles offered no motive, no suspects, just the cold, hard fact of his death. Daniel felt a wave of grief wash over him, a grief compounded by betrayal and confusion. He had come seeking answers about his father's life, but he had stumbled upon a violent death and a web of deceit. He pressed Javier for more information, any lead, no matter how small. Javier warned him to be careful. "Some secrets are best left buried, Senor Vance," he said, his voice low and serious. "You are treading on ground that may be dangerous." Ignoring the warning, Daniel became even more determined. He hired Javier to delve deeper, to try and uncover the circumstances surrounding his father's murder. He also decided to conduct his own investigation, revisiting some of the places his mother and father might have frequented during their time in Buenos Aires. He went back to the hotel in Montserrat, hoping the current owner might recall anything more about Julian Thorne. The owner's elderly father, who had run the hotel in the 80s and 90s, was now frail and his memory was fading. But Daniel spent hours with him, showing him the photograph, asking gentle questions. In a fleeting moment of clarity, the old man's eyes lit up. "Thorne, Julian Thorne," he mumbled. "He had associates, not good people." He trailed off, the memory slipping away. Daniel also sought out Isabella, the antique shop owner. He showed her the newspaper clippings Javier had found. She didn't recognize the name Julian Thorne in connection with any trouble, but she remembered his mother being very anxious during her stay. "She seemed afraid," Isabella recalled, "like she was running from something or someone." As Daniel pieced together these fragments of information, a disturbing picture began to emerge. His father's life in Buenos Aires seemed to have been far from ordinary. The associates the hotel owner mentioned, his violent death, his mother's fear, it all hinted at a darker side of his father's past. A life shrouded in secrecy and perhaps even danger. He started looking into old business records, hoping to find some trace of what his father had been doing in Buenos Aires. It was a painstaking process, sifting through dusty archives, encountering bureaucratic roadblocks at every turn. He learned that Julian Thorne had arrived in Argentina with very little money but had somehow become involved in several small import-export businesses. These businesses seemed legitimate on the surface, but something felt off. The details were vague, the paper trails thin. Then, Daniel stumbled upon a name that kept recurring in connection with his father's business dealings. Ricardo Vargas. There were no photographs, just mentions in old documents. Javier discovered that Ricardo Vargas was a known figure in the Buenos Aires underworld, a man with a reputation for violence and illicit activities. Could his father have been involved with someone like this? Could Vargas have been connected to his murder? Driven by a growing sense of dread, Daniel decided to seek out any information he could find about Ricardo Vargas. He knew he was venturing into dangerous territory, but he felt he had come too far to turn back now. The truth about his father, however dark, was within his grasp. He just had to be brave enough to seize it. He contacted some of Javier's contacts in the city, people who operated in the shadows, hoping someone might have information about Vargas and his connection to Julian Thorne. The response was hesitant, fearful. Vargas was a man who commanded respect through intimidation. But Daniel persisted, fueled by the need to understand the father he never truly knew. He was about to delve into a world far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. A world where secrets were guarded with violence and the truth could come at a deadly price. The information Daniel received was fragmented and delivered in hushed tones, through intermediaries who were clearly afraid. Ricardo Vargas was a ghost, a powerful figure who moved in the shadows, leaving little trace. But the whispers Daniel managed to gather painted a chilling picture. Julian Thorne's import-export businesses had allegedly been a front for something far more sinister, and Ricardo Vargas had been his partner. Their relationship had reportedly soured over a deal gone wrong, a betrayal that had ended with Julian Thorne's murder. Daniel knew he was playing a dangerous game, but the need to know the truth outweighed the fear. Through one of Javier's contacts, he managed to get a message to someone within Vargas's circle, requesting a meeting. The response was cold and ominous. A time and a location, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He went alone, Javier vehemently advising against it. As he stepped inside the cavernous space, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay, he felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. Several men emerged from the shadows, their faces hard and unforgiving. And then he saw him, Ricardo Vargas. He was older than Daniel had imagined, but his eyes held a cold, calculating glint that spoke of a ruthless nature. Vargas listened impassively as Daniel, his voice trembling slightly, explained who he was and why he was there. He spoke of his father, of the lies he had been told, of the need to understand what had happened. For a long moment, Vargas remained silent, his gaze unwavering. Then, a cruel smile touched his lips. "Your father," Vargas said, his voice a low growl, "was a fool. He thought he could double-cross me and get away with it." He went on to reveal a story of greed and betrayal, of a lucrative smuggling operation that Julian Thorne had tried to sabotage. The homicide, Vargas admitted without remorse, had been a necessary consequence. Daniel listened in horror as the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. His father, the man he had thought he knew, had been living a double life, involved in dangerous criminal activities. His mother's trip to Buenos Aires had likely been an attempt to confront him, perhaps even to escape with him, but something had gone terribly wrong. The lie about the car accident had been a desperate attempt to protect Daniel from the truth, from the shame and the danger. The encounter with Vargas was tense and volatile. Daniel knew he was lucky to leave the warehouse alive. He had the truth, but it was a truth that was heavy with sorrow and disillusionment. He returned home to Sarah, the weight of his discoveries etched on his face. The following weeks were a time of quiet reflection. Daniel shared the full story with Sarah, the shock and sadness evident in her eyes. They grieved for the father he never truly knew, for the life that had been built on a foundation of lies. There were no easy answers, no neat resolutions. The past remained a tangled web of secrets and violence. Daniel realized that his journey across 3 continents had not brought him the closure he had hoped for. Instead, it had opened up a Pandora's box of painful truths. He had tracked his father, yes, but the man he found was not the man he remembered. He was a stranger, a flawed and ultimately tragic figure. In the end, Daniel found a measure of peace in understanding. He could finally let go of the idealized image of his father and accept the complex reality of his life and death. The journey had changed him, had stripped away his innocence, but it had also given him a deeper understanding of the fragility of life and the enduring power of family secrets. Thank you for watching this story. If you found it gripping and thought-provoking, please give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible and untold stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We love hearing your thoughts, so please share your reactions and theories in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more captivating narratives to light. Until next time, take care.